Week 4, Unit 7. Exercise 1. It is not uncommon for children to report overconfidence about accomplishing difficult tasks, even when they are given feedback indicating that they have performed poorly. Their self-efficacy may not decline. The incongruence between children's self-efficacy and their actual performance can arise when children lack task familiarity and do not fully understand what is required to execute a task successfully. As they gain experience, their accuracy improves. Children may also be excessively swayed by certain task features and decide based on these that they can or cannot perform the task. In subtraction, for example, children may focus on how many numbers or columns the problems contain and judge problems with fewer columns as less difficult than those with more columns, even when the former are conceptually more difficult. This is an instance where higher self-efficacy is problematic because students feel unrealistically overconfident and not motivated to seek help and improve their skills. As children's capability to focus on multiple features improves, so does their accuracy. Exercise 2. Using generative AI in the hiring process still has its challenges and limitations. Generative AI may, for instance, produce inaccurate or misleading content that could harm the reputation or credibility of recruiters or candidates. It may also raise ethical or legal issues regarding data privacy, consent, or ownership. Thus, complete automation seems unlikely in the current field as hiring managers, legal departments, etc. still have to review and sign off on generated job ads and candidate communication. Therefore, generative AI should not replace human judgment or interaction in hiring, but rather complement it. Generative AI should be used as a tool to augment human capabilities and creativity, not to automate them entirely. Recruiters should always verify the information and edit the content generated by generative AI before using it. They have to monitor the performance and impact of generative AI on their hiring outcomes and candidate experience. Exercise 3. Having asked the class a question, the average American teacher typically waits less than a second before picking a child to provide an answer, sending out a strong message that speed is valued over complex thinking. But a study from the University of Florida has found that something magical happens when the teacher takes a little more time, just 3 seconds, to wait to pick a child, and then for the child to think about the response. The most immediate benefit was seen in the length of children's answers. The small amount of thinking time meant that the children spent between 3 and 7 times as long elaborating their thoughts, including more evidence for their viewpoint and a greater consideration of alternative theories. The increased waiting time also encouraged the children to listen to each other's opinions and develop their ideas. Encouragingly, their more sophisticated thinking also translated to their writing, which became more nuanced and complex. That's an astonishing improvement from the simple act of exercising teacherly patience. As the researcher Mary Budd Rowe put it in her original paper, slowing down may be a way of speeding up. Exercise 4. There is little hope of finding high-grade sources of minerals other than those we know already. The planet's crust has been thoroughly explored, and digging deeper is not likely to help since ores form mainly because of hydrothermal processes that operate near the surface. The oceanic floor is geologically too recent for containing ores. Only the sea floor near the continents could be a useful source of minerals. The oceans themselves contain metal ions, but extracting rare metals from seawater is out of the question because of their minute concentrations that make the process highly expensive in energy terms. In addition, the amounts dissolved are not very large. For instance, considering the concentration of copper in the oceans, we can calculate that the total amount dissolved corresponds to 10 years of the present mine production. Some suggest outer space as a source of minerals, but the energy cost of leaving Earth is a major barrier. Then, most bodies of the solar systems, for example, the Moon and the asteroids, are geochemically dead and contain no ores. Exercise 5. When we apply a simple technological solution to a problem that is actually nested within a complex biological system, we cannot easily predict how the system will adapt to the technology. In fact, if we don't understand how the problem is linked to or supported by the ecosystem, then we are defining the problem in human terms without understanding its biological or ecological foundation. For example, we have used synthetic pesticides to control unwanted insect pests in agriculture since the late 1940s. Each and every pesticide that has been in common and widespread use has resulted in the evolution of resistant pest species, and this has resulted in a constant search for replacement pesticides as a countermeasure. This back-and-forth battle to control a biological problem with a technological solution has no ending point and is the result of an unwillingness on the human side to recognize the underlying issue. Exercise 6. Psychiatry is often viewed as medicine's poor cousin, and there are good reasons for this. During the past century, our understanding of bodily mechanisms has advanced through scientific understanding on a whole number of different fronts and led to important new drug treatments in areas as diverse as cardiology, cancer therapy, and treatment of bacterial and infectious diseases. However, our understanding of how the human brain works as a whole still remains far from clear, and as a consequence, drug treatments for mental disorders have often been far from inspiring, with even the mechanisms of action of those drugs that do seem to have a positive impact on mental health remaining obscure. This lack of clarity is due to the brain being so much more complex than any other organ in the body, but it also reflects the fact that human conscious awareness is as much a social as a biological entity, and therefore human mental disorders have a major social input. Exercise 7. When our brains encounter something unfamiliar or potentially dangerous, we quickly shift to fight or flight response, in which all of our mental and sometimes physical energy is devoted to addressing the perceived threat. Researchers at Harvard Medical School have done extensive research into this response and found that when faced with information that feels unknown or threatening, our brains send out a distress signal to the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system, which controls such involuntary body functions as breathing, blood pressure, heartbeat, and the dilation or constriction of key blood vessels and small airways. These physical responses can be uncomfortable or even painful, but more importantly, they then trigger emotions that end up guiding our decision-making. We all know what it's like to shake our heads and think, "I'd be so much smarter than that," while watching the main character in a horror movie make a baffling, terrible decision in the face of extreme danger. Chances are, however, we wouldn't be smarter. In fight or flight mode, the part of our brain that takes over is only horror movie level smart, which isn't very smart at all. Exercise 8. In today's digitally dynamic landscape, consumer behavior and experience play crucial roles in shaping the success of businesses across industries. The advent of artificial intelligence, AI, has revolutionized the way companies understand, analyze, and respond to consumer needs. Through the amalgamation of advanced algorithms, machine learning, and data analytics, AI offers a profound opportunity to delve deeper into consumer behaviors, providing invaluable insights that facilitate personalized experiences and foster long-term relationships. Understanding consumer behavior lies at the heart of any successful business strategy. AI, with its ability to process vast amounts of data in real time, allows for a comprehensive understanding of consumer preferences, habits, and tendencies. By analyzing past behaviors and interactions, AI identifies patterns that might escape traditional analysis, enabling businesses to anticipate future needs and tailor offerings accordingly. Whether it's predicting purchase patterns, understanding browsing behaviors, or understanding sentiment through social media interactions, AI-driven insights empower businesses to fine-tune their strategies for maximum impact. Exercise 9. One of the key constraints on the development of sports tourism prior to the 19th century was the lack of suitable transport. There were incremental improvements from the 15th century onwards involving more comfortable coaches and, in the 18th century, greatly improved roads, at least in Britain, if not everywhere in Europe. But transport was primarily slow and costly. For example, the journey time from London to Bath in 1680, a distance of 107 miles, was around 60 hours. Vastly improved roads had cut this time to 10 hours by 1800, but the time and cost still meant that only the wealthy in society could travel substantial distances. It was not until the development of the railways in the 19th century that a relatively cheap and efficient form of transport was afforded to the population at large, enabling sports tourism to develop beyond the small and exclusive upper-class activity that had existed hitherto. As Ray Vamplew points out, the railways revolutionized sports in England by widening the catchment area for spectators and by enabling participants to compete nationally. Exercise 10. Cambridge biologist William Hamilton studied the social behavior of ants and wondered to himself not only why they often sacrifice themselves for their nestmates, but also how it was that sterile worker ants might have arisen, given these females don't breed, but rather leave this to the queen. Hamilton solved this problem when he realized that, due to their particular method of breeding, these sterile worker ants share 75% of their genes with their sisters. Hamilton then began to consider a gene's eye view of natural selection and immediately realized such non-queen worker ants could actually pass on a larger proportion of their genes indirectly by, instead of breeding themselves, helping to raise their young sisters. For each sister raised, they're passing on 75% of their genes rather than the 50% that would be passed on via normal sexual reproduction. To Hamilton, ant colonies should really be perceived as a form of extended family where the genetic interests of all are served by the apparent altruistic behavior of some. Exercise 11. The most common justification for a move to autonomous vehicles could well be called the argument from safety. The implementation of driving automation systems will reduce the risk of death or injury from automobile accidents. The basic premise seems reasonable enough. Humans behind the wheel can be unreliable and all too often distracted, tired, or otherwise affected. This fallibility of human drivers no doubt contributes to a rate of injury and fatality that, in other contexts, would be considered a public health crisis. Driving automation systems, by contrast, are supposed to be more reliable and, depending on the overall prevalence of autonomous vehicles and of the infrastructure to support them, may be able to coordinate with other vehicles to avoid accidents and other problems. On these premises, and assuming the new technology functions as advertised, it only makes sense to replace an unstable and unreliable human control system for something demonstrably better. Exercise 12. Most students can provide numerous examples of common sense, such as never putting a fork into an electrical outlet, not sticking your tongue on a pole covered with ice, or placing your hands in boiling water, avoiding looking directly into the sun, and not attempting to attend a state dinner at the White House without an invitation. And yet, none of these examples of common sense represents knowledge that we were born with. Instead, we have learned all these things. The sociological perspective emphasizes that knowledge is gained through trial and error, experience, and the influences of others in the social environment. Experience teaches us to act routinely in most social situations. Before long, such expectations come to be viewed as common sense. However, because each of us has unique social experiences, we come to view common sense differently. We see it from our unique perspective. Thus, if one has not been exposed to a particular behavior, labeled by some as common sense knowledge, one is not capable of acting in an obvious or routine manner.